Oh, how you doing? I got a good one for you today. Hot topic of discussion lately has been Iron. He's like free for all the new players. Everyone pretty much gets him. You also get a set of missions in the beginning of the game that will net you his legendary exclusive equipment and his his SSR card, which is a humongous boost, especially for new game players. Getting the SSR cards and the exclusive equipments is pretty much the hardest part of building a character. So since they give that to you for free, and turns out he is a god. So we're going to go over his contract and break him down a step at a time, because not only does he have a very useful kit and some very interesting abilities, he also has some secret hidden effects and abilities that aren't necessarily labeled in his kit. So without wasting any more time, let's break down the contract. Okay, starting with skill 1, Iron Fist charges toward the enemy and inflicts damage by 55% of the attack 2 times, so 110%. Whenever you skill this up under an SSR card, he will self-increase his attack speed for 2 turns with a 70% chance and a little bit of effect accuracy. You could get that up to 100. So immediately a 110% multiplier first skill. That's also a self-buffing speed buff so that he can end up taking more turns overall. The range on this is actually pretty nice too. He jumps whenever he goes to do this attack, so if the enemy is a little bit of a short distance away, he can cover that distance fairly easily. Second skill, 4 combo strikes, inflicts damage to the enemy by 44% of the attack 3 times and inflicts bonus damage by 10% of the enemy's current HP. The bonus damage can't exceed Iron's attack. Now whenever you skill this up, it also turns into a defense break for 2 turns with a 100% chance, so you don't even need effect accuracy to get that up. So completely ignoring the fact that this is a 132% multiplier attack, just right off the bat, a very important thing to note here is the 10% of enemies' current HP is humongous. There's barely any units or barely any moves that do damage that is just not based off of your unit's attack. Even tanks, all their attacks do damage based off their attack. So this is an extra multiplier incorporated into his kit, where if your enemy has an excruciatingly high amount of HP or a ridiculous amount of defense, you can still have a reliable attack to do a decent amount of damage, completely disregarding their inflated stats. Another quick little note about this ability is the bonus damage cannot exceed his attack. So say if the enemy has 1,000,000 HP, you're not going to do 100,000 damage with this attack, but based on how much attack you have, you can get upwards in the 4,000 or 5,000 damage, especially for enemies that have like a ridiculous amount of defense. If you've ever gone to that boss in season 2 that goes through defensive stance and you're only doing 20 damage to him with your strongest attacks, this will consistently do 10% of his HP or the maximum amount of Iron's attack without completely ignoring the defense factor. Iron Hadouken. Now this is humongous. This is his selling point for most players. The rest of his kit is really good too, but this is just an absolutely ridiculous skill. Inflicts damage to enemies around you by 54% of the attack and inflicts bonus damage to the selected enemy by 27% of the attack. Gains a 3-time damage ignore effect for 2 turns. Whenever you promote this, it decreases the skill cooldown time of it by 1 turn whenever he gets hit or a damage ignore effect gets deducted. So that requires a little bit of accuracy to activate as well, but that's completely insane. Say he does this skill and then someone's fully built Marissa comes up and he will just completely ignore the 40,000 damage she was going to do. If it's one of those bosses that does like 1,000,000 damage, he will completely ignore the 1,000,000 damage. It will be 0 for every single stack of damage ignore on him. Plus, whenever the damage ignore gets depleted, if this is skilled up, it reduces its cooldown, so he can essentially just spam it and always be invincible as long as he's not stripped, as long as by the time his invincibility shield goes away, he doesn't lose too many turns in the middle. You can just stay invincible. Completely ridiculous. But we're going to get more into this attack a little bit in a minute, but for now let's just continue on. Body check. Charges towards the enemy with the lowest HP out of all enemies and inflicts damage by 190% of the attack and bonus damage by 20% of the enemy's current HP. The bonus damage can't exceed Iron's attack. Again, 2 moves in his kit that are not just completely a slave to his attack, but also can be benefited off the enemy's total HP, a very rare quality to have in units in this game. Plus, whenever you promote it, it stuns them up to a 100% chance, so no accuracy needed to get a stun with that. Another cool thing about this is the range is not a factor. If you're all the way on the left side of the battlefield and the enemy's all the way on the right side of the battlefield, he will absolutely fly all the way across it like Goku and smack them in the back of the head. It doesn't matter how far away they are, but it can be interrupted. So if he's using this skill and the enemy has a skill that stuns, or the enemy's using a rage skill like Amy that knocks back in the middle of his rage skill, he can be knocked out of it. That being said, that doesn't happen too often, especially if you're using him on your team and you're not like the one interrupting him. It's much harder to be interrupted by enemy AI. Now, back to this second skill, because I've heard mixed reports. Again, I'm not stating anything in fact whenever I say something that someone else has told me, but I've seen multiple times people saying that this skill also removes buffs from the enemy. Now, I don't know if they're just talking about damage ignore or if they're just talking about shields, but the way they make it sound, they're saying it'll remove like an attack buff, it'll remove a defense buff. It's basically a stripping attack. I myself have never seen that happen, but if you have seen that happen and you're 100% sure that it works on like attack buffs and buffs that aren't really damage reliant, go ahead and post that in the comments, and then I will push that one up to the top so that other people can know that as well. That is absolutely not in the description or the text of the ability, so whether or not that's intentional, I'm not sure either. So if you're getting him for that, that is probably not a safe investment, because I don't think he's intended to do that, or if he is, that needs to be added to this tooltip. Okay, so whenever you put on his SSR skill card, it will increase his attack by 30% when possessing the damage ignore effect. Whenever you get his exclusive equipment, it adds one more time to the damage ignore effect in Iron Hadouken. So not only will, whenever you first get it, it ignores damage 3 times he is hit, it will increase that up to 4, which gives you in turn 4 chances to decrease its cooldown time so that you can spam it again if it runs out. His collection effect is going to be defense up, so whenever you get him, if you're not using him, or if you get these units and level them up, it will increase your defense in all scenarios. Now let's go ahead and break down some reviews. I like to go through these reviews and debunk some of the high-rated ones from people that use him whenever they were early game and they posted a review and they haven't quite deleted that review yet. I know that you people that post those reviews see this and then you like hate me for it, but I'm sorry. If you don't post the review, I won't have to do this. Very good single target nuker, only waifu butt lickers have rated him low. Okay, I don't know, I can't speak on that, but he is a very good single target nuker, so agree, I'll give you a thumbs up. Amazing boss damage and immunity damage. I don't know what you mean by immunity damage, but yes, he can do a lot of boss damage, especially with that second skill. Can be used as a tank, better than Magnus too. So Magnus and Iron are completely different. Not only does Magnus have self-buffing defense buffs and able to provoke in an entirely different kit, Iron is just susceptible, his tank ability is susceptible to his third skill. So if the enemy has a way to prevent that third skill, then he's not a tank. Like, he can be built as a tank. People argue to build him as a tank, but he is not intended to be a tanker. He's intended to be a bruiser or a nuker, and then your defenses rely in your third skill as well. It would really be a shame to build him as full tank, because that is such a useful kit that's based around doing a lot of damage, especially based on his attack. So if all of your stats are, invested into HP and defense, then you've pretty much just wasted 3 moves out of his kit. Great for early game, will die quickly without proper gear. Everyone's great for early game. You can't really judge a character based on if they're good at beating the lowest levels of the game. But dying quickly without proper gear, that's also true for anybody. Anybody can die quickly without proper gear. But I actually think that Iron would be the one to, mitigate that effect a little bit. He has backup invincibility. So even if he has absolutely no gear, as long as he has damage ignore on him, he's going to ignore no matter how much damage the enemy's doing. Advanced unit either nukes or DPS and is a tank due to immunity. So I think I just figured out what y'all mean by immunity. Whenever you're saying immunity, it can be confusing because immunity actually is an effect in this game, and it's not what you're thinking. The effect you're thinking of is damage ignore. He has a damage ignore buff to where whatever damage he takes gets ignored, but he is not immune. Immunity means that whenever an enemy supplies a debuff, like a defense break, or if they do an attack break or a stun, that is just shrugged off and it doesn't take effect. Immunity means they're unable to be affected by debuffs. It does not mean the same thing as damage ignore. Okay, now getting into the battle simulator, this is, base Iron. Whenever you first get him, the range, his first thing to note, his move range. He actually has a much larger move range than a lot of dealers do, as well as not many people know this. So whenever you increase the attack, HP, and defense of your dealers under the mercenary page, once you get that to level 50, you can actually increase a dealer's movement range, which is pretty much required for a lot of dealers, but he has such a good range to run around in, it's not really a requirement for him. On top of that, his first skill, if you see, has a pretty solid range too, and he jumps straight to the enemy when he uses it. So even if you're at the edge, like way over here, you can still jump all the way over there and use that skill. Very nice. So the second skill will actually show what I mean in this simulator. Whenever he hits the first 3 times, it does, you know, upwards 40 something damage. But did you notice the last hit only did 4 damage? It's because these simulator units are tuned to the lowest level of HP and defense possible. So even though that skill does 10% of the enemy's total HP, this enemy apparently only has 40 HP, so it's only going to do 4 damage. And it's the same on the opposite side of the scale, where if the enemy had 4 million HP, it would do upwards into the maximum of Iron's attack, but it will not be able to, you know, scale off of the total max HP of the enemy. Or if he had a ridiculous amount of defense to where you actually were doing 4 damage a hit, but he had a legitimate amount of HP, it would do 10% of that enemy's HP. As well as this is the skill that people say it will strip a buff. I wish that you could like edit this simulator more. If you could like make the enemies attack you so that you could test interrupts, if you could buff them so you could test strips and stuff, that would be really nice to implement into the simulator. So right now I cannot confirm whether or not he actually does strip buffs with that second skill. But again, if you know he does it for sure, go ahead and put it in that comment. All right, now the last thing to note is I'm actually going to move way out of the range here because this third skill has a super nice range. So even if I was way over here as a dealer at the start of the match, if I move all the way to the corner, not only am I in range to hit him with the first skill, but the third skill has an extra range as well, and it will not jump him, but it is a ranged attack. So even if I sit here and pass, hold on, what is it? Reset. Coming over here, you are still able to hit them from far away, even if you're immobile, even if you have a movement down debuff, you are still able to use that attack and get off your damage ignore. Now that it's not upgraded, we have 2 turns of 3 ticks of damage ignore. So whenever these enemies, if I could make them attack Iron, no matter how much damage they were doing, they would actually be doing 0 until that either his 2 turns are over or those 3 ticks are gone. Now for the rage skill, I'm going to have a little fun. I'm going to move as far away as I can to show you what I mean whenever I say he will jump all the way across the screen. That's about where I can go. So if I use this here, he will fly all the way over there and hit that guy. So that's very cool. I love that. So Iron, all in all, not bad as a base unit, but the Iron that we need to be looking at is actually going to be the maxed Iron. Plus, they give you his exclusive equipment for doing some quests, and they give you his SSR card. So it's not going to be hard to reach a high level of Iron efficiency with his skills and abilities. So now his first skill, same range, but whenever he uses it, it has a chance to increase his attack speed. Now it does not do it every time. You're going to need accuracy in order to get that to proc more effectively. This second skill becomes a lot more useful because as he actually does the 4th hit that does damage based off their max HP, it also supplies a defense break, so the enemy will be taking much more damage from anybody who is attacking that unit. And of course, Iron Hadouken, while it's fully skilled up, we now get 4 ticks of the damage ignore instead of just the usual 3. So if someone like Josephine goes and uses her first skill on you that hits 3 times, it doesn't completely negate your damage ignore. You still have an extra chance to use it. Plus, every time that ticks off a damage ignore, you have a chance to reduce the cooldown of the skill anyways. Building upwards with accuracy, we could get that to a pretty decent rate so that you could always have that up. And the last big difference to notice is using this pretty much stuns every time. I don't think these bots have any resistance really, but yes, it is a 100% chance to stun versus the enemy's resistance, so you don't need very much accuracy to efficiently stun. Depending on your goal for Iron, there are a lot of different ways you can build them. Of course, speed is sort of a variable stat, so get as much speed as you need, but you can put attack percent on his ring slot, which is very unique because most units require either crit rate, pin rate, or crit damage in that ring slot in order for them to be effective. But since he has so many attacks that do damage upwards based on his max attack, then if you're fighting bosses with him, or if you have him in Trivia 11, or an area where he will benefit from having a ridiculous amount of attack, you can definitely put as many attack subs as you want, a violent set on him for more attack, just attack percent on every equipment, and then get upwards to like 6,000 or 7,000 attack. So even on these bosses with ridiculous defense or ridiculous HP, he'll still be able to do upwards of 7,000 with that 4th hit from his second skill. Not only will that do that amount of damage with that hit of the skill, he still has the first 3 hits as well added into the combo of that skill. So if you're sitting on a bunch of attack percent rings right now that you don't really want to use on anybody, this could be a good person to eat one of those so that he could be actually benefiting from having it on. And the last thing I'm going to go over is going to be the top 3 cards that I would use on him if it were me completely building him up. If I was building him for arena or something where he would be susceptible to be stunned or frozen or immobilized, then I would definitely look at the Shock Protection Suit Rage card. It will increase his resistance for 3 turns when the battle begins, so even if he's not fast enough to get off his damage ignore, somebody cannot, stun him, or he'll be less likely to be stunned and then be completely useless. So that way maybe he could resist a stun or resist a taunt or something, so that way he could actually get off the damage ignore and do what he needs to do. The number 2 card I would use for him is going to be the Boomerang Rage card, because it steals the rage bar of the enemy who crits him by 10. So if you have damage ignore and say somebody like Marissa uses an attack on you that hits 2 times, she will crit you 2 times but actually end up doing 0 damage because of your damage ignore, but you will still steal 20% of her rage bar. So that will make enemies attacking him less dangerous overall, because they won't get to use their rage skills as often, and he will get to use his rage skill a lot more, especially without having to worry about dying, because a big setback to this card is if an enemy is critting you, they're probably doing a lot of damage and they're probably going to kill you before you can take effect of your rage skill anyways. So it's very nice to be able to just take the full effect advantage of this card and completely negate its weaknesses. And the number 1 card I would pick for Iron is going to be the Urgent Shield Rage card. Gains protection effect for 3 turns by 20% of the total HP with a limit of 1 time when you're inflicted with damage that would take you to death. So what that means is whenever he dies, if somebody was able to maneuver past your defenses or able to counter you and actually get a killing blow on your Iron, this will prevent him from dying 1 time and maintaining 20% of his HP in the form of a shield, which can in turn give you your chance to get your Iron Hadouken off and then get all of your damage ignore effects back up. If you have looting on him, get your health back up, have your support heal him back up, and then you get to keep your Iron in the fight up to, for as long as you can keep him alive again. So that seems very, very useful to me. Well, that's going to do it for Iron, y'all. Hopefully, if you had a little bit of confusion on his kit or his effectiveness, maybe this would help change your mind. Or if you were leaning towards hard tank, maybe you'll build him as more of a hybrid instead of hard tank. Or, you'll be able to build him as a nuke and take effect of all of his SSR cards and all of his extra abilities that he gains when being fully built. But that's going to do it for me, y'all. I'll see y'all later. Bye.